The massive doors of the Galactic Council Chamber made a loud grinding sound as they slowly opened. Inside the huge white marble hall, representatives from 47 different alien species sat in their assigned seats, all wearing their finest ceremonial robes and armor. The air was thick with tension and the smell of exotic perfumes from a dozen different worlds. Ambassador Zixthyla of the crystalline hegemony adjusted her shimmering form and checked her translator device one more time. Today was the day they would finally meet the representatives of the mysterious Deathworld called Earth. For months, the galaxy had been buzzing with rumors about these humans. The initial reports were terrifying. Earth was classified as a Class 12. Deathworld, a planet so dangerous that most civilized species would die within minutes of landing on its surface. The fact that an intelligent species had not only survived, but thrived on such a hellish world meant only one thing. They had to be the most savage and brutal warriors the galaxy had ever seen. Commander Velther of the Regelian military caste flexed his four muscular arms as he reviewed the intelligence reports on his datapad. His people had been preparing for war ever since Earth's existence became known. According to their scientists, any species that could survive on a Deathworld would inevitably become conquerors. It was simple logic. The weak died, the strong survived, and the strongest sought new worlds to dominate. The Valdorian Chancellor, whose people had perfected the art of diplomacy over thousands of years, nervously smoothed down his elaborate feathered robes. His species had tried to establish peaceful contact with dozens of aggressive civilizations throughout history, but never with beings from a Deathworld. The very concept was terrifying. How do you negotiate with creatures that see death as a daily occurrence? Admiral Cointera of the Stellar Navy sat rigid in her chair, her blue-scaled hands gripping the armrests tightly. Her fleet was positioned just outside the solar system, ready to respond if this first contact went badly. The humans had somehow managed to develop space travel despite living on a planet that should have killed them all. What kind of technology could such a species create? What weapons might they possess? The grinding of the doors grew louder, and every being in the chamber fell silent. This was it, the moment that would determine the future of galactic civilization. Would the humans come in peace, or would they announce their intentions to conquer the galaxy? Either way, the assembled representatives were as ready as they could be. What walked through those doors was not what anyone expected. Jake Morrison shuffled into the chamber, wearing bright orange flip-flops that made a soft slapping sound against the marble floor. His cargo shorts were wrinkled and slightly too big for his lanky frame. The t-shirt he wore was faded and had a picture of a cartoon corn on it, with the words, "I survived the Iowa State Fair," written in peeling letters. In his right hand, he held a half-eaten corn dog on a stick, with yellow mustard dripping slowly onto the pristine floor. He was 28 years old, had messy brown hair that looked like he had just rolled out of bed, and seemed completely unaware that he was being stared at by some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He took another bite of his corn dog and glanced around the enormous chamber with mild interest. "Oh, hey, this is fancy," he said through his food, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. A few drops of mustard fell from his snack and landed on the marble with tiny splashing sounds. 3 different alien species had representatives who immediately fainted at the sight of him. The ethereal ones, who existed as pure energy beings, flickered and nearly dispersed entirely. The hive mind collective began buzzing frantically among themselves in frequencies that made the translator devices screech with feedback. "Commander." Velther felt his 4 arms begin to tremble. This could not be right. The humans were supposed to be savage warriors who had conquered their nightmare planet through pure brutality and endless warfare. This casual creature before them did not match any of their intelligence reports. He looked like he was on vacation, not like someone representing a species of Deathworld barbarians. Jake finally swallowed his bite of corn dog and looked around the chamber again. "I am Jake Morrison, representing Earth," he announced in a friendly voice. "Sorry I'm late. The food court downstairs had these amazing pretzels, and I figured I should try some alien cuisine before the boring political stuff started." The Valdorian Chancellor made a sound that roughly translated to, "What in the 17 hells is happening?" His perfect diplomatic training had not prepared him for this scenario. How do you respond to someone who treats a historic first contact meeting like a casual lunch break? Ambassador Zixthala's crystalline form began to shift colors rapidly, a sign of extreme confusion among her people. She had spent years preparing for this moment, studying every aspect of human culture that their long-range sensors could detect. Nothing in their data suggested that humans were so remarkably casual about everything. Jake noticed the uncomfortable silence and shrugged his shoulders. "So, where do I sit? And is there air conditioning in here? It's kinda warm." He fanned himself with his free hand while still holding the corn dog in the other. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. Finally, a small mechanical being from the automated collective rolled forward and extended a metal arm toward an empty chair near the center of the chamber. "Thank you, little guy," Jake said cheerfully, completely missing the fact that the little guy was actually the supreme intelligence of an entire robotic civilization. He walked over to the chair and sat down, putting his feet up on the table. In front of him, his flip-flops dangled from his toes as he got comfortable, the warrior poet Shalder of the Obsidian clans, whose people valued honor and strength above all else, stared at the human in complete bewilderment. This was supposed to be their greatest potential threat. This person who treated a galactic summit like a backyard barbecue? Jake took another bite of his corn dog and smiled at the assembled representatives. "So, what's on the agenda today?" "I hope we can wrap this up before dinner, because I promised my mom I'd call her tonight, and she gets worried if I'm late." The galaxy's most powerful beings sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they were seeing. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was apparently wrong, and none of them had any idea what to do about it. 3 hours had passed since the formal first contact ceremony was supposed to begin, and the galactic representatives were more confused than ever. Jake Morrison had finished his corn dog within the first 30 minutes, then somehow produced a bag of potato chips from one of his cargo short pockets. Now he sat comfortably in his chair, casually munching on chips, while Ambassador Krianok of the Serpentine Alliance tried to explain the complex territorial disputes that had been raging in the Andromeda sector for the past 2 centuries. The Serpentine ambassador spoke in careful, measured tones about ancient claims and historical precedents, using the formal diplomatic language that had been refined over millennia. His snake-like form coiled and uncoiled as he gestured toward the holographic star maps that showed the contested regions. 3 different species claimed the same solar systems, each with detailed legal arguments about why their claim was superior. Jake listened politely, occasionally nodding and making small sounds while he ate his chips. When Ambassador Krianok finally finished his 20-minute explanation, Jake raised his hand like a student in a classroom. "So basically," Jake interrupted, "you guys are fighting over who gets to mine some rocks?" He gestured with a chip for emphasis, sending a few crumbs flying through the air. "Back home, we'd just arm wrestle for it, or maybe flip a coin. Seems easier than a 300-year war." The chamber erupted in shocked whispers and electronic buzzing. The translator devices worked overtime trying to process the concept of arm wrestling and coin flipping in a diplomatic context. Several species had never encountered such simple conflict resolution methods. The warrior poet, Shalder of the Obsidian clans, slammed his ceremonial gauntlet on the table with a loud crash that echoed through the chamber. His people were known throughout the galaxy for their fierce honor code and their elaborate combat rituals. The idea of reducing a territorial dispute to a game of chance was almost insulting. "You dare mock our sacred conflicts, human?" Shalder's voice boomed through. His translator. "Your species was described as the most dangerous in the galaxy. We expected warriors, not ... this." He gestured at Jake's casual posture and snack food with obvious disdain. Jake looked genuinely confused and slightly hurt. He put down his bag of chips and sat up straighter in his chair. "Dangerous? I mean, I guess. I once fought off a raccoon that got into my trash, but I wouldn't call that dangerous. More like Tuesday night." He paused and seemed to think about something. "Oh, wait. You probably mean the Australia thing, right? Yeah, that place is nuts. I went there once for vacation and nearly got eaten by a spider the size of a dinner plate. The room fell completely silent. Even the background humming of the environmental systems seemed to quiet down. Several delegates began frantically checking their translation devices, convinced they must have misunderstood something important. Admiral Quantera of the Stellar Navy leaned forward in her chair, her blue scales shifting to a darker shade that indicated intense concentration. "You speak of creatures that consume beings of your size as if it were a routine occurrence," she said carefully. "Are such predators common on your world?" "Oh, huntsman spiders don't eat people," Jake laughed, reaching for another chip. "They just look scary and move really fast. Though there was this one time, my buddy Steve got bit by a redback spider while we were camping, and we had to rush him to the hospital. He was fine though, just felt sick for a few days. Good times." The ethereal Lumina ambassador, whose light form had been flickering nervously since Jake's arrival, now began to pulse with what could only be described as terror. "Your companion was poisoned by a venomous creature, and you described this as good times?" Jake shrugged and smiled. "Well, Steve made a full recovery, and we got a great story out of it. Plus, the hospital had really good coffee in the waiting room. You've got to find the positive in every situation, right?" The Crystalline Hegemony's War Council began an emergency session in the corner of the chamber. Their species communicated through harmonic resonance, so their conversations sounded like a choir of crystal bells to the other delegates. From the increasingly frantic tempo of their music, it was clear they were having trouble processing what they were learning about humanity. Commander Velthur of the Regellian military caste had been taking notes throughout the conversation, but now he put down his stylus and stared at Jake with all four of his eyes. "Morrison of Earth," he said slowly, "our intelligence reports indicated that your planet is home to numerous apex predators. Are you saying your species coexists peacefully with these creatures?" "Well, not exactly peacefully," Jake replied, finishing his chips and crumpling up the empty bag. "I mean, bears and mountain lions can definitely ruin your day if you're not careful. But most of the time they just want to be left alone, same as us. The trick is knowing how to act around them and not doing anything stupid." "Bears?" asked the Valdorian Chancellor weakly. "Mountain lions?" "Big furry things with claws and teeth," Jake explained helpfully. "Bears are usually pretty chill, unless you get between them and their food or cubs. Mountain lions are more sneaky, but they mostly avoid people. The real problem is when people leave food out while camping or try to take selfies with wild animals. That's when you get into trouble." The assembled delegates exchanged glances of pure bewilderment. The concept of selfies didn't translate well, but the idea of voluntarily getting close to apex predators for any reason was completely foreign to most galactic civilizations. Ambassador Zixthal's crystalline form had been steadily shifting through different colors as she processed the information. Now she was a deep purple shade that indicated severe confusion. You willingly enter the territories of these predators for recreational purposes? Sure, camping is fun, Jake said cheerfully. Nothing beats sitting around a campfire, roasting marshmallows, and listening to the sounds of nature. Though you do have to hang your food in a tree so the bears don't get it. Learned that lesson the hard way during a trip to Yellowstone. The Hive Mind Collective began buzzing even more frantically. Their species had achieved perfect safety through unity and collective consciousness. The idea of individuals voluntarily exposing themselves to danger for fun was completely incomprehensible to them. Jake noticed that everyone was staring at him again and gave them a friendly wave. Hey, don't look so worried. Earth's not that bad once you get used to it. Sure, there are a few things that can kill you, but that's true everywhere, right? I bet your planets have their own dangers too. The silence that followed this statement was deafening. Most of the represented species had eliminated all significant dangers from their homeworld centuries or millennia ago. The idea that an intelligent species would simply get used to deadly threats was beyond their comprehension. Jake looked around the chamber and realized he might have said something wrong. Right? He asked again, less confidently this time. By the fourth hour of what was supposed to be a brief introductory meeting, Jake had somehow managed to accidentally prevent two separate diplomatic incidents. The first happened when the Thermal Imperium and the Ice Collective started arguing about temperature control in the chamber. Jake simply suggested they meet in the middle, which was apparently a novel concept that none of their negotiators had considered in 3 centuries of climate-based warfare. The second incident occurred when the Hive Mind Collective accused the Individual Freedom Coalition of spreading dangerous ideas about personal choice. Jake had yawned and mentioned that back home, his neighbor Betty disagreed with him about everything from lawn care to politics, but they still borrowed tools from each other and shared holiday cookies. The concept of maintaining friendship despite fundamental disagreements was so foreign to both species that they immediately stopped arguing to ask Jake more questions about this Betty person. Commander Velther of the Regellian military caste found himself genuinely curious about this strange human perspective. His people had spent months preparing detailed invasion plans based on the assumption that humans were savage warriors. Now he was beginning to wonder they had completely misunderstood the nature of humanity. Morrison of Earth, Velther began, his forearms gesturing formally. Your dossier indicates that your planet is classified as a Class 12 death world. Our scientists calculated that only the most hardened warrior species could survive such conditions. Yet you seem remarkably. He paused, searching for the right word. Peaceful. Jake had produced yet another snack from his seemingly endless supply of pocket food. This time, it was a granola bar that he unwrapped while considering the question. Yeah, Earth's kinda rough if you're not used to it. But once you grow up dodging tornadoes and avoiding poison ivy, most stuff doesn't seem that bad. He took a bite and chewed thoughtfully. Though I guess it's all relative. My sister Lisa always said I had a high tolerance for weird situations. The Faldorian Chancellor's feathered crest stood up in alarm. Tornadoes? These are atmospheric. Phenomena capable of destroying entire settlements, are they not? Sure, but they're pretty predictable if you know the signs, Jake replied, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather, which technically he was. You just head to the basement and wait it out. Though there was this one time in Oklahoma where we had to shelter in a gas station bathroom. That was gross, but hey, better than being outside in the wind. The assembled delegates were now taking notes frantically. The crystalline hegemony's representatives were harmonizing in increasingly complex patterns, trying to process the idea that humans treated planet-destroying weather events as routine inconveniences. Admiral Quintera of the Stellar Navy leaned forward, her blue scales shifting to a deeper shade of concentration. What other routine dangers do you face on your homeworld? Jake finished his granola bar and crumpled up the wrapper, adding it to the small pile of snack debris that had accumulated on the table in front of him. Well, let's see. There's hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, blizzards, heat waves, lightning storms, venomous snakes, bears, mountain lions, wolves, poisonous plants, food poisoning from bad seafood, skin cancer from sun exposure, and my neighbor's dog that always gets loose and chases. Joggers. He paused to think for a moment, then continued, Oh, and there's tornadoes like I mentioned, volcanic eruptions if you live near one, avalanches in the mountains, forest fires, flash floods, sinkholes, and probably a bunch of other stuff I'm forgetting. The room had gone completely silent. Even the automated translation systems seemed to be struggling to process the sheer volume of daily threats that Jake was describing. Several delegates had stopped taking notes and were simply staring at him with expressions of horror and disbelief. Ambassador Zixthylis' crystalline form was now rapidly cycling through colors, so quickly that she looked like a living rainbow. And you consider this normal? She asked in a voice that came out as barely a whisper through her translator. I mean, yeah? Jake said, genuinely confused by their reaction. Most of that stuff you can avoid if you're careful and pay attention to weather reports. The real dangerous thing is driving on the freeway during rush hour. Now that's genuinely terrifying. The warrior poet Shaldar of the Obsidian clans, whose people had built their entire culture around the concept of honor through combat, found himself speechless. He had expected to meet fellow warriors who would understand the glory of battle. Instead, he was facing someone who treated actual combat with deadly forces as a background inconvenience. You speak of warfare against the very elements of your world, Shaldar finally managed to say. How many of your kind perish in these daily battles? Jake looked surprised. Daily battles? It's not really like that. I mean, sure, people die in accidents and natural disasters, but most of us live pretty normal lives. We just take precautions and don't do anything too stupid. Like, you don't go swimming during a lightning storm or hike in grizzly territory without bear spray. The ethereal ones. Representative flickered so violently that several other delegates moved away from her section of the chamber. Your species has developed countermeasures against apex predators? She asked. Bear spray is just really strong pepper spray, Jake explained. It doesn't hurt them permanently, just makes them not want to bother you. Though honestly, if you're smart about food storage and don't surprise them, most bears will just ignore you. They're usually more interested in fish and berries than people. The hive mind collective's buzzing had reached a pitch that was making some of the other species, translators, malfunction. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of collective safety through unity, and the idea of individuals casually coexisting with apex predators was breaking their fundamental understanding of survival. Jake noticed the increasingly frantic atmosphere in the chamber and tried to be reassuring. Look, I know it sounds scary, but humans have been dealing with this stuff for thousands of years. We've gotten pretty good at it. The key is respecting the dangers without being paralyzed by them. Like, I'm not going to stick my hand in a rattlesnake den, but I'm also not going to stay inside all day because there might be a snake somewhere in the state. The automated collective's supreme intelligence, who had been processing data at maximum capacity for the past hour, finally spoke up. Human Morrison, our analysis suggests that your species has developed psychological adaptations that allow you to function normally despite constant exposure to lethal threats. This is ... unprecedented. I guess, Jake said with a shrug. Though I think you're making it sound more dramatic than it is. It's just life, you know. You deal with what comes at you and try to enjoy the good parts. Like, sure, camping has bears and snakes and stuff, but it also has amazing sunsets and really good s'mores. The assembled representatives of 47 different star systems sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they were learning. The humans weren't savage warriors because they were naturally aggressive. They were incredibly resilient because their planet had trained them to be, and they had somehow maintained their essential humanity, despite living in conditions that would drive most species to extinction or madness. Jake looked around the chamber and smiled. "So, what else did you guys want to know about Earth? I've got plenty more stories if you're interested." The emergency session that followed Jake's casual revelation about Earth's routine dangers lasted 6 hours. While the human representative napped peacefully in a nearby chair, his bright orange flip-flops kicked up on the council table. Then, greatest minds in the galaxy tried to process what they had learned. The various species had retreated to their designated discussion areas, but their conversations were loud enough that the translation systems were working overtime. "He speaks of planetary-scale weather phenomena as minor inconveniences," reported Dr. Velinara, the Valdorian science advisor to her delegation. "According to our analysis, a single tornado could devastate our capital city. Yet humans have developed early warning systems and simply relocate temporarily when these events occur." The Valdorian chancellor ruffled his feathers nervously. "The psychological implications are staggering. They have normalized the presence of existential threats to the point where they no longer register as significant dangers." Meanwhile, the crystalline hegemony's military strategist was sharing equally disturbing findings with her war council. The biological threats alone should have driven any rational species to extinction. She harmonized in complex crystalline tones. Venomous creatures, apex predators, and toxic plant life exist in such abundance that most of our homeworlds would be uninhabitable. Yet humans have not only survived, but developed recreational activities that deliberately expose them to these dangers. Admiral Quine Terra of the Stellar Navy was pacing back and forth in front of a holographic display showing Earth's atmospheric conditions. "Look at these storm systems," she told her officers. "Hurricane-force winds, electrical discharges powerful enough to destroy spacecraft, and precipitation events that could flood entire continents. Our fleet wouldn't last a day in that atmosphere, yet humans go outside and play in it." The Regellian military caste was having perhaps the most difficult time processing the information. Commander Velther stood before his advisors, his forearms gesturing in confusion. "We prepared for war with savage barbarians who had conquered their world through brutal conflict. Instead, we find beings who have achieved such mastery over adversity that they treat deadly encounters as casual anecdotes." "Sir," interjected his intelligence officer, "perhaps we have been thinking about this incorrectly. The human Morrison mentioned that most of these dangers can be avoided with proper preparation and common sense. What if their strength lies not in their ability to fight these threats, but in their ability to coexist with them?" The Obsidian clan's warrior poet Shaldar was struggling with an even more fundamental crisis. His entire worldview was built on the concept that strength came from conquering one's enemies through honorable combat. But humans seem to gain their strength from something else entirely, the ability to accept danger as a natural part of life and simply adapt accordingly. "They do not seek glory in battle," he told his fellow warriors. "They seek to avoid battle while remaining prepared for it. This is not cowardice, but a form of wisdom we have never encountered." As the hours passed, a new understanding began to emerge among the various delegations. The humans were not dangerous because they were aggressive conquerors. They were dangerous because they represented a completely different approach to survival, one that no other species had ever considered. When Jake finally woke up from his nap, stretching and yawning loudly, he found 47 different alien species staring at him with expressions that ranged from awe to terror to fascination. Some were taking holographic recordings, Others were furiously scribbling notes, and a few seemed to be sketching pictures of his flip-flops. "Did I miss anything important?" he asked, sitting up and accidentally knocking over a ceremonial water vessel with his elbow. The vessel, which was apparently worth more than most planets, shattered on the marble floor with a musical chiming. "Sound. Oh, shoot," Jake said, immediately getting up to help clean up the mess. "I'm really sorry about that. I'll pay for it, or replace it, or whatever. I'm kind of clumsy when I first wake up." The vessel had belonged to the melodic hegemony, whose representative quickly assured Jake that it was not a problem. In fact, the musical sound it made when breaking was considered quite beautiful by their standards. This casual interaction, where Jake immediately took responsibility for his mistake and offered to make amends, was noted by every delegation. Present Commander Velther approached Jake carefully, as if he were a dangerous but fascinating specimen. "Morrison of Earth," he said formally, "we have been reconsidering our initial assessment of your species. Perhaps the question is not whether humans are dangerous, but how you became so resilient that you no longer recognize danger when it presents itself." Jake considered this while fishing around in his cargo shorts for what appeared to be a package of cookies. "I guess growing up with constant low-level threats makes you pretty adaptable. It's like building up immunity to something. After a while, you just develop good instincts about what's actually dangerous and what's just scary looking." He found his cookies and opened the package, offering them around to the nearby delegates. Most politely declined, though the automated collective's representative accepted one out of curiosity and began analyzing its molecular structure. "Like my cousin Bobby lives in Florida," Jake continued, "and he's got stories about alligators in his backyard that would make your scales curl. But he's not terrified of them, because he knows how they behave. He just uses a pool skimmer to shoo them away from his hot tub when they show up." "Alligators?" several delegates asked in unison, their translators struggling with the concept. "Big reptiles with lots of teeth," Jake explained helpfully. "They're basically living dinosaurs that hang out in ponds and swamps. Occasionally they eat people's pets or grab someone who gets too close to the water, but mostly they just want to be left alone to sunbathe and eat fish." The Serpentine Alliance's representative, who bore a passing resemblance to the creatures Jake was describing, looked deeply uncomfortable. "Your cousin coexists with apex predators in his recreational area?" "Yeah, it's pretty normal in Florida," Jake said, taking a bite of his cookie. "The real trick is not panicking about stuff you can't control and preparing for the stuff you can. Bobby's got a good fence around his pool area, keeps his dog inside at night, and doesn't go swimming in murky water. Common sense stuff." The ethereal one's representative flickered with what might have been understanding. "You accept the presence of danger rather than eliminating it." "Well, you can't eliminate everything," Jake replied reasonably. "Even if you got rid of all the alligators, there would still be snakes, spiders, hurricanes, lightning, car accidents, and probably a dozen other things that could hurt you. At some point, you just have to live your life and take reasonable precautions." The warrior poet Shalder bowed deeply, his elaborate armor clanking with the movement. "We have misjudged your people, human Jake. We see now that true strength lies not in seeking battle, but in treating it as a routine part of existence while continuing to find joy in life." Jake looked a bit embarrassed by the formal gesture. "Nah, I just don't like drama. Life's too short to get worked up about every little thing that might go wrong. Plus, if you spend all your time worrying about bears and tornadoes, you miss out on all the cool stuff like hiking and storm watching." The assembled representatives exchanged glances, and for the first time since the meeting began, many of them were smiling or making their species equivalent expressions of approval and understanding. What started as a diplomatic disaster had transformed into an unexpected turning point for galactic relations. Jake's casual approach to problem-solving, combined with his species' unconscious resilience, began to influence how the assembled civilizations viewed their own conflicts. The formal proceedings had been abandoned hours ago in favor of what Jake cheerfully called just talking things through like normal people. He had somehow acquired a space-age smoothie from the cafeteria during the break, and now he sipped it thoughtfully while listening to Ambassador Krianok describe yet another centuries-old territorial dispute. This one involved 5 different species claiming the same asteroid belt, each with elaborate legal precedents and historical grievances that dated back to before most of their civilizations had developed space travel. "You know," Jake said during a pause in the explanation, "this whole territorial dispute thing reminds me of a problem we had back home. 2 neighboring towns couldn't agree on where their border was, so they fought about it for like 50 years. Not with weapons or anything, just endless court cases and really angry town hall meetings. The delegates leaned forward, eager to hear how such a complex issue could be resolved. Several species had been dealing with similar boundary disputes for millennia, spending enormous resources on legal battles and diplomatic negotiations that never seemed to reach any conclusions. Finally, this old farmer named Pete Johnson got tired of listening to everyone argue about it. Jake continued, stirring his smoothie with a bendy straw. He suggested they just build a park right on the disputed land and share it. Now it's got a really nice playground, a decent barbecue joint, and both towns split the maintenance costs. Problem solved. Everyone's happy, and the kids from both places play together every day." Ambassador Zixthalus' crystalline form began to brighten with what appeared to be excitement. "You propose creating shared spaces in contested regions, rather than fighting over exclusive control? Sure, why not?" Jake said with a shrug. "Fighting's expensive, and nobody really wins in the end. Plus, shared spaces tend to have better food because everyone brings their own specialties. This alien fruit blend is pretty good, by the way. You guys should try expanding your culinary exchange programs." The concept was so simple, yet so revolutionary, that several delegations immediately began emergency discussions. The Thermal Imperium, an ice collective who had been locked in temperature-based warfare for centuries, started talking about creating neutral zones with variable climate controls. The Hive Mind Collective and Individual Freedom Coalition began exploring the possibility of shared research facilities where both collective and individual approaches could be studied. Within hours, 3 separate centuries-old conflicts had been resolved using variations of what the delegates began calling Pete Johnson's Park Solution. The Rigelian military caste, who had been preparing for war with humanity, instead proposed a cultural exchange program where human resilience training could be shared with species who wanted to learn how to better handle adversity. "The thing is," Jake explained to a fascinated group of military strategists, "most conflict resolution isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about finding a solution that lets everyone save face and get something they want. Like, maybe the Serpentine Alliance doesn't need to control that whole asteroid belt. Maybe they just need guaranteed access to the rare minerals. And maybe the other species don't actually need exclusive mining rights. They just want to make sure they get a fair share of the profits." Commander Valther's 4 arms gestured in amazement. "You suggest that conflicts arise from miscommunication, about underlying needs rather than irreconcilable differences?" "Most of the time, yeah," Jake replied, finishing his smoothie. "People get so focused on their positions that they forget to talk about what they actually want. Like, back home, my neighbors were fighting about a tree on their property line. One guy wanted to cut it down because it dropped leaves in his pool. The other guy wanted to keep it because it gave his house shade. Turns out they could both be happy if they just trimmed the branches on the pool side and left the rest alone." The Obsidian clan's warrior poet, Shaldar, stood up and began reciting what sounded like an epic poem about the wisdom of finding strength through compromise. His people's entire culture was built around concepts of honor and combat, but Jake's approach offered them a new way to think about victory that didn't require defeating an enemy. As the day wore on, Jake found himself accidentally mediating disputes that had seemed impossible to resolve. He suggested that the melodic hegemony and the silent collective could work together by creating music that included both sound and silence. He proposed that the Rapid Evolution Society and the Stasis Preservation League could study each other's approaches to learn about the benefits and drawbacks of both change and stability. The key is not trying to change people's minds, he explained to a group of diplomatic advisors. It's about finding ways for different approaches to coexist. Like some people love cities and some people love the countryside. Instead of arguing about which is better, you just make sure there are good roads between them so people can visit back and forth. The automated collective's supreme intelligence had been quietly observing Jake's methods throughout the day. "Human Morrison," it said in its mechanical voice, "you have resolved more conflicts in one day than our most advanced diplomatic algorithms have managed in decades. How do you determine the optimal solution so quickly?" Jake looked surprised by the question. "I don't know about optimal. I just try to think about what would make everyone reasonably happy. Like, if my sister wants to watch a comedy movie and my mom wants to watch a drama, we find something that's funny but also has some emotional depth. Nobody gets exactly what they wanted, but nobody feels left out either. A concept of reasonably happy rather than perfectly satisfied was apparently revolutionary to several species who had been seeking complete victory in their negotiations. The Perfectionist Syndicate, whose culture demanded flawless solutions to every problem, began discussing the possibility that good enough might actually be better than perfect, if it meant faster resolution and less conflict. As Jake prepared to return to Earth, now wearing a ceremonial sash that clashed horribly with his cargo shorts and flip-flops, he found himself surrounded by beings who had initially planned to either conquer or flee from his species. The transformation in their attitudes was remarkable. "Morrison of Earth," Commander Velther announced formally, "you have shown us that true wisdom often comes disguised as simplicity. Your people's ability to find practical solutions to complex problems, while maintaining such remarkable composure, is perhaps the most valuable trait in the galaxy. Plus," added Admiral Quintera, "your species' natural resilience means you could serve as mediators in conflicts that would be too stressful for other civilizations to handle. Who better to negotiate between warring factions than people who consider natural disasters a minor inconvenience?" Jake looked around the chamber, taking in the faces of dozens of alien species who were now looking at him with respect rather than fear or confusion. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to be some kind of galactic mediator. I'm just a guy from Nebraska who likes corn dogs and doesn't stress out about stuff too much." The ethereal one's representative flickered with what might have been amusement. "Perhaps that is precisely why you are qualified, Human Jake. You approach each situation without the burden of expectation or the fear of failure that paralyzes more sophisticated minds." Shalder stepped forward and offered Jake a small crystalline token. "This is a symbol of respect from the Obsidian clans. We name you Peaceful Warrior in our language, one who fights against conflict itself rather than against enemies." Jake accepted the token with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, that's really nice. Though I still think you're making this sound more impressive than it actually is. I just try to keep things simple and treat people decently." As the formal ceremonies concluded and Jake prepared to leave, he paused at the massive chamber doors and turned back to address the assembled delegates one final time. "Oh, and if you guys ever visit Earth, skip the tourist traps and try the local diners. That's where you'll find the real culture. And maybe bring some of those alien fruits. I bet they'd make great smoothies back home. He shuffled away in his flip-flops, empty smoothie cup in one hand and his new ceremonial token in the other, leaving behind a galaxy that had been forever changed by his casual wisdom. The representatives began planning humanity's integration into galactic society, not as conquerors or subjects, but as the practical problem solvers and natural mediators the galaxy had unknowingly needed all along. The Deathworld's representative had arrived wearing flip-flops and eating a corn dog, and somehow that simple authenticity had made all the difference in bringing peace to conflicts that had raged for centuries. As Jake would later tell his mom during their promised phone call, it wasn't that complicated. People just needed to remember how to talk to each other like regular folks instead of making everything so formal and scary. The galaxy, it turned out, had been taking itself far too seriously. Sometimes the best solution was the simplest one, and sometimes the most powerful we.